All right, welcome back to Nanoeconomics. This is lesson 8 on elasticity. Last we left off, we were talking a bit more about demand and specifically about normal and inferior goods, as well as substitutes and complements. And really, that is to kind of lead us into one of what ends up being one of the more complicated and challenging topics, but also ends up being useful if you're actually kind of running a business in the future and making decisions about pricing and what kind of revenue or what kind of profit outcome you should expect. So, just quickly taking a look at our overview. The first thing we kind of want to look at is how we kind of understand elasticity from a words meets mathematical perspective. So bear with me here. I know that this is the part where a lot of students just feel like the midpoint method and the formula involved just becomes a little convoluted. You get things wrong once and your intuition is thrown off. But this is where I think we can kind of unlock the topic and make it make a lot more sense for people. So what we're talking about when we talk about elasticity is the responsiveness to change in price in terms of, what we're talking about in the good. In the same way, elasticity in your waistband would be the responsiveness to change in your size. And so it's the concept is the same. What we're just looking at is how it is approached mathematically within economics. So what we're talking about is a percentage change in quantity demanded over a percentage change in price. And every word is critical. And that's what I tell myself in my head when I am faced with a question related to elasticity is it's the percentage change in quantity demanded. In other words, I need the QD up top and over the percentage change in price. And another way to think about this is usually the dollar is on the bottom dollar. So basically anything related to dollar denominations, income elasticity will be something that we get into. And in income, we're still getting paid in dollars. The price is denominated in dollars. So we put those on the bottom. And then what we're going to do when we look more closely here, specifically at this, is what we really want to look at is what the percent change in quantity demanded is. So the percent change in quantity demanded comes from the change in quantity demanded over the average quantity demanded. So that delta, the triangle symbol, is the symbol that you'll see for change in. So for example, if we go from selling 100 units to selling 120 units, I don't know how to do it on PC. The change in is plus 20. So I'm going to write it in terms of a positive negative just so that we can kind of see how it works over the long run. But in our sample here, we're just saying if we go from selling 100 units to selling 120 units, the change in quantity demanded is plus 20. And we're going to put that as a fraction over our average quantity demanded. In other words, going from So going from 100 to 120, the average is just the first quantity plus the second quantity and divided by 2. So here it's really easy to see. When they're nice round numbers, you can just split the difference. So we're going to end up with the percent change in, do that. So to end up with, what we end up with is a percent change in quantity demanded of 20 over 110. And that is 0.18. And if we wanted to think about that as a percent, it's 18%. And we're finding that percent just by moving that decimal over 2 places. We end up with 18%. So the top of the original fraction that we looked at, percent change in quantity demanded, could be written as 0.18, or we could just think of it as 18%, depending on how the question's worded and how kind of detailed we need to be getting. So the next thing we're going to do is look at the bottom of this fraction, and the percent change in price is going to be the change in price over the average price. And again, we're just doing kind of the same thing, and we're going to create an example where we're selling more units. So I'm going to make the change in price is negative $2. So when we go from selling whatever this item may be for $10 each to selling it for $8 each, that change in price is going to be negative 2. And so it's going to just be negative 2 over 9. Which is negative 0.2 repeating. And so the elasticity in this example is negative, or is 0.18 over negative 0.22, which is negative 0.82. And the reason why we worked through an example and made it kind of more confusing first is because what we're going to do with this is try to work backwards and understand why we would do this math, why we would, really want to learn a bit more about elasticity, especially if your major is business, or if you kind of intend to make decisions regarding how much you should charge for something in order to make the most money for your company or for yourself. So we've got this elasticity coefficient. So that's going to be your kind of label vocabulary for this. It's typically less critical, but you, depending on the program, you might see it as how things are worded. But so I'm going to try to kind of draw a weird box here, but okay, that's not going to work. I'm not going to worry about it that much. And I'll just do this. All right. So if the elasticity coefficient is negative 0.82, what I recommend students do when they have an elasticity coefficient is to turn it into a fraction first. Now here we worked through to solve for an elasticity coefficient, and when you have an example like that, what's going to end up happening is the math will work out to where it's a little less even, like it has here with negative 0.82. But a lot of times when you're given a question where you work the other way around and you're given a elasticity coefficient, maybe it's given in a way where it's already rounded for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to round this 8 just to be simple here, and then turn it into a fraction. All right. So in this case, negative 0.8 as a fraction is negative 8 over 10. So it's just 8/10. And now oops. So first thing we're going to do is take it and round it just so that it's simpler. But if you're given a 3 as a fraction is just 3 over 1. 0.25 as a fraction is just 1 over 4. Sometimes thinking about it in terms of change, like coins, can help. Like if you see 0.25, that's just a quarter. So it's easier to remember and kind of mentally do that math quickly. So the elasticity coefficient, I'm turning it into a fraction. So now it's negative 8 over 10. And I'm going to put it back into the words above for the elasticity definition. So I need to zoom out a bit here. And we're going to just say, let's draw some lines. Oops. Sorry. I need to, there we go. So it's this definition here that we need to use. Here, when we're putting the words back into the definition for elasticity. It's kind of sloppy, but it'll work. And so what we want to say is you're going to have a negative 8% change in quantity demanded as a result of a 10% increase in price. Because we've got a negative 8 on top and a 10 on bottom, we know if we increase the price by 10%, we're going to decrease quantity demanded by 10%. So a couple of key things to keep in mind is you have to remember it's a percentage change and it's in quantity demanded. So the quantity demanded is more of a terminology thing. Like it would be hard to say it in a way that implies the whole demand curve is also shifting. But there's a percentage change in the quantity that we demand that results in a percentage change in price. And that is our elasticity or our responsiveness to changes in price. So with this good, we would see a 10% increase in price causing an 8% decrease in quantity demanded. And that's based on the elasticity coefficient and critically 4 things. So to calculate this, so if there's no change in price and quantity, we can't really calculate the price elasticity of demand for the good. If there, so the price has got to change to calculate price elasticity. The quantity may be the same or close to the same for new or old. And we're going to get into a little bit more as we introduce more of this key vocabulary for the topic. But I think that this is a good way of looking at it where you can start by telling yourself elasticity is the percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. And then write down the formula, percent change in quantity demanded over percent change in price. And then remembering what each of those parts of the fraction are made of. And it's essentially other fractions. So if you were to write this out, it would be change in quantity demanded over average quantity demanded over change in price over average price. So you've got kind of like a 4-part fraction. But it's easier to just simply calculate the percent change in quantity demanded and the percent change in price. If your course gives you a specific order or specific steps for the operations, you kind of want to follow that, just because sometimes if you were to calculate all this once in a calculator and then round it, it might come up differently than if you were to calculate each step and round along the way. So this brings us to some of our key vocabulary. And we already discussed a little bit that the delta where the triangle is the math symbol for change in. So if you see that, it's just kind of an easier way to start making sense of things without having to write everything out. We'll just leave it like this. So for this section, what we're going to do is we're going to introduce the vocabulary of elasticity, and then we're going to get into how it actually relates to the stuff we've already talked about with substitutes and complements and normal goods and inferior goods. So to start out with, we would say a good is generally elastic or price elastic, or demand for the good is price elastic if the percent change in quantity demanded is greater than the percent change in price. In other words, if you decrease the price by 5% and people buy 10% more of that item, then we know that our demand for that good is relatively price elastic. In the example that I've got here, if we raise the price by 5%, there might be a decrease of 20% in the quantity sold. So a good way to kind of consider that as a business decision maker would be that if we increase the price by just 5%, we're not going to increase our total revenues by that much, but we're going to decrease quantity sold by 20%, which would actually lead to lower profit overall or lower total revenue overall for us. And then the opposite is true. So that is elastic, and it is the label that we would apply to the type of consumer behavior that generally looks at the price and says, okay, I'll put more in my cart. Or they look at the price and say, that's going to keep me away from buying that item today. So an example that I used previously is the pasta aisle, and that if I'm looking at the pasta packages and it's $2 for the spaghetti that I might be thinking about getting, I have all the other ingredients at home. So $2 is pretty high for spaghetti. I'm just going to get one package for today. And as I'm standing there, the clerk comes by and says, actually, we've got a price change and it's now $1 a package for spaghetti. And I kind of look at that situation and I say, I'm going to go ahead and stock up a little bit. I don't know when spaghetti is going to be on sale again, but I'd rather not end up having to pay $2 for one package the next time I'm going to get spaghetti. So I buy 4 packages. In other words, I've increased my quantity demanded by 400%, and the price has only decreased by 50%. So we're actually increasing quantity demanded by more than the price change. If the clerk says again, I actually had a different price label for this one that just came out. Now the packages of pasta are only 25 cents a pack this week. And so I'm going to respond to that by basically ending up with an entire cart full of pasta because it's non-perishable. I can always use pasta, and at 25 cents for a package of spaghetti or elbow macaroni or whatever, I can figure out a way to make that really kind of stretch the value of my dollar. But the price change may not be as significant. So, or the price change may still be more significant than the quantity change that I've increased for putting in my cart. So now if we at some point get to the point where we're decreasing the price by another 50%, but I don't put 50% or more additional pasta packages in my cart, now we've reached this bit of vocabulary, which is the inelastic range, or the point where the good is price inelastic. And that's where the quantity demanded percentage change is going to be less than the percentage change in price. So for an example, if we raise the price by 5%, but we only lose 2% of our sales, then from a business decision perspective, we're going to end up better off. If we decrease the price by 5% and only gain 2% more sales, then we're really not going to want to make that decision, because we're going to end up actually losing money in the long run. So finally, the last one that's kind of less often discussed is unit elastic. And that's just where the percent change in quantity demanded is exactly equal to the percent change in price. In other words, an increase in price of 5% causes a change in quantity demanded by 5% as well. So one point, I'm going to zoom out and see if I've got it in these notes. It looks like I do not have it in these notes. And we'll kind of talk about it a little bit more visually as well, because like I said, these are going to be really expanded lessons. Like, I have no actual time frame benchmarks or standards. I, as time goes on, should be able to add more kind of time or maybe pre-record videos between daily streams so that we can really go as in-depth as we need, and I can focus on what it takes to understand and learn these concepts, as opposed to try to put it in a structured semester setting and kind of let you roam free in the resources. So we're definitely going to get more into how this works visually, but for now, really the only thing I want to do is just quickly illustrate what I'm talking about, in that where the ranges of elasticity on a demand curve. So if we kind of think of what we imagine as our standard or our normal demand curve as we typically draw it, where we've got downward sloping demand, then the point where the percent change in price is greater than the percent or less than the percent change in quantity demanded is up in this part of the demand curve. So let me do an arrow and another arrow. And actually, let's do another arrow, but I'm going to do it this way now because I think that might help. So there's different ranges of the demand curve, and essentially kind of this portion of it is the inelastic range. In other words, they've already got the price very low, so when they lower the price by a relatively high percentage, like another 50% off, my percent change in quantity demanded is relatively minimal because I have a lot in my cart already. So if they're 50% discount when I have 20 in my cart only causes me to put 2 more in my cart, that's just because I'm kind of running out of the need for that. So in this example with pasta, I kind of talk about stocking up to a really high degree, like an insane amount of pasta, but there is a point where I say, all right, I really have enough, and having storage space to walk around through my house would be better than having a house full of pasta because it was so cheap. So we hit an elastic range on that same normal demand curve. In dead center usually is the point where it's unit elastic, and that's because of another concept. I don't want to. I need to make sure I'm not foreshadowing too much that makes things confusing. But dead center, we're going to have the unit elastic point or spot where the percent change in price is exactly equal to the percent change in quantity demanded. And then in the upper portion, kind of toward the origin, but higher on the vertical axis, you're going to notice that when the price is high, decreasing the price by any given percentage might yield an even greater change in percent change in quantity demanded. So we've got the elastic range, the unit elastic range, and the inelastic range here. So now we're going to look at some slightly new vocabulary that relates back to stuff we've already discussed, and that is cross-price elasticity. Just going to do this. Cross-price elasticity is what we would be calculating if we're going to try to understand whether goods are substitutes or complements, and to what degree they're substitutable or complementary. So the cross-price elasticity essentially puts the price of one good under the percent change in quantity demanded for the other good. So the percent change in quantity demanded for peanut butter that happens because of a decrease in the percentage decrease in price of of the jelly that people usually like to make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, or the percent decrease in demand for Coca-Cola as a result of the percentage decrease in price for Pepsi during Super Bowl weekend. So if there's a decrease in demand because of a decrease in the other good's price, we're talking about substitutes. When the other good went down in price, I chose to buy the other good, therefore I decreased my demand for this good. In other words, I decreased my demand for Coke when the price for Pepsi went down by instead demanding Pepsi. If the percent change in quantity demanded increases as a result of a decrease in the price of the other good, then they're complements. So when the price of jelly decreases, the price or the quantity demanded for peanut butter might increase. Or if the price of smartphones decreases, then the demand for the percent change in quantity demanded for apps would be higher. So that relates back to the vocabulary that we've already kind of discussed. I'm not going to recover everything in depth again here, just because I really want to keep these lessons as focused as possible. But what we will do is move on to make a couple of notes here. Let's see. Okay, there it was. Substitutes have positive cross-price elasticity. In other words, the price and quantity in a cross-price elasticity calculation going the same direction implies they're substitutes. If there's a negative sign on top or bottom, then you're talking about complements. So now with income elasticity, that's how we're going to understand the degree to which goods are normal or inferior. And it relates back to what we talked about yesterday with anything from packaged ramen versus going out to eat, or getting a fast food combo meal versus going to a sit-down restaurant, or flying to your favorite vacation destination versus going on a road trip. So when we're looking at normal and inferior goods, there are always pairs, and they're kind of infinite in terms of just however you think of things. If you're buying something and there would be a different way that you would make that, solve that problem, different product you would purchase. If you had triple the income, then what you're purchasing is an inferior good. And then, as your income rises, what was a normal good before maybe gets replaced, and now you move on to a kind of a good that is better than and more normal in this sense than the rest. So it's just kind of in comparison or in relation to the others, and it relates to what happens when income changes. And we discussed that more in depth yesterday. But really what we want to focus on is this new introduction of income elasticity. So we have elasticity, or price elasticity of demand, and then we have cross-price elasticity, or cross-price elasticity of demand. And now here we have income elasticity, which is also often called income elasticity of demand. So sometimes it's a four-piece vocabulary term, but we're talking about the same concept here. With income elasticity, we're putting a percent change in income on bottom, and we're looking at what happens to percent change in quantity demanded. So if income increases and quantity demand increases, in other words, if there's a positive relationship between those two, then we have a normal good that we're looking at. If we have a negative income elasticity coefficient, in other words, the decrease in income causes an increase in quantity demanded, that means we're talking about an inferior good. And so I've included a few examples that we've kind of already discussed a little bit. And then I also included in the chat a link to the PDF. I'll also tweet that out a little bit later so that you can download this entire PDF. And beyond what we won't be covering here in the lesson are just a couple of more examples of walkthroughs using these concepts and kind of looking at the numbers the same way we did at the very beginning, where we arrived at negative 0.82 for the elasticity coefficient. So it's just some more examples to look at written out in word form so you can kind of understand them from a business decision perspective, as opposed to an economics quiz math that you'll never, potentially never even consider again. Then finally, I did include the definition of luxury goods just because I see this come up pretty commonly, and it's easier to head off any confusion in advance than it is to correct a misconception when people begin to think of inferior goods and luxury goods as opposites, as opposed to inferior goods and normal goods. So normal goods and inferior goods are kind of the pair there. When we talk about luxury goods in the context of an economics course, especially like the AP level, we're talking about the percentage of income that we spend on the good. So it doesn't come up in these elasticity contexts necessarily. It sometimes would be a bit of vocabulary that you might look at. It's more often than not thrown in as a misdirection or an alternative choice that isn't correct that you could choose. But it just helps to understand in advance that luxury goods are essentially goods that when your income increases, you decide to spend a greater percentage of your income on those goods. So a lot of times people's luxury goods might be a car or a home, where if you get a new job or if you get a new job, you might decide to buy a new house or buy a new car or something like that. So really that is what I wanted to kind of present today in this lesson. And just to quickly review in general, this is if this is understandable, then you're in good shape. If you can understand both the math and the words in these questions, then not only will you be able to do well in your class, but you're also going to have a much easier time just really working with elasticity as a concept, as a business decision maker, or just in any capacity where it might be somewhat relevant to understand maybe the differences in decisions that you're already making. So again, elasticity is how we respond to changes in price in terms of how we demand things, and the word definition that you need embedded in your head is the percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. And that percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price is just made up of two fractions. And to get the percentage change in quantity demanded, we simply take the change in quantity demanded over the average of those two quantities. And then to get the bottom of it, we want the percentage change in price, so we take the change in price over the average of those two prices. So this is called the midpoint formula, and it's used very, very commonly. If you do see it called the midpoint formula, don't be alarmed. It's not some sort of different approach. And I think that really should give you a decent kind of point to go back to and review. If you have additional questions, absolutely feel free to send me email at nanoeconomicstv@gmail.com, messages in the suggestion box on my Twitch page, anytime in the chat here on Twitter. I'm more than happy to help anyone out, and I know that for most people, paying a tutor for a personalized hour is a lot more difficult. So I, over time, would like to develop this as sort of a study hall place for people to come and ask their questions and have some means of support if they don't have the resources or available to them through their program. So thank you for tuning in to Lesson 8, Demand, Part 4, Elasticity, and I'll see you on Monday.